Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Swan. I'm your Vice President for the Public Sector Division. I extend my welcome to all members joining us today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the lands in which we meet. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'll now hand over to Alex Scott, your Union State Secretary.
Thanks for that, James. So today we have another public service briefing in relation to a range of industrial issues. We'll try and keep it to just over half an hour for everybody. We've taken some feedback about how we will be trying to work these meetings through. I can get my screen to work. So what we'll be wanting to try and set up as a regular process from here on in is trying to schedule these meetings on the last Wednesday of the month, every month, to give people some capacity to know when the meetings will be coming up in advance. That'll be so this will be on a regular basis. What we would try and also run through today is a broad agenda talking about particularly working from home, some of the public sector consultative mechanisms that are currently in place, the review of the Public Service Act, the issue in relation to Qsuper amalgamation, and the broader Respect at Work report and what that means in terms of the Queensland Public Service. In terms of that process, we will try and cover a number of the questions that people sent through before today's session. If you have questions after session, given the numbers we expect to be online, we probably won't be able to do them all through the chat. So if you can be there with us, and we'll try and get out an email this afternoon to everybody who attended to be able to make sure that we can cover your questions, but also to get feedback about how we would be able to cover your questions in the future. In terms of that, the first issue we wanted to talk through clearly in terms of the implications for Brisbane at the moment is in relation to the lockdown and what we're looking at in terms of work from home arrangements and what this means in the short to medium term. Prior to the announcement of the lockdown on Monday, we'd already organised, or the Public Service Commission had convened a meeting with Together to talk about increasing the percentage of the workplace who are working from the office. So we'd moved to about a 60% percentage of people working from office in the Brisbane CBD late last year. And the Public Service Commission wanted to convene a meeting with us on Monday to talk about what that looked like in terms of moving that to increasing that to 80%. So looking at a more significant return to office than was the case last year. Clearly, given the circumstances of Monday, that conversation didn't go very far. But in terms of what that has identified for us in terms of the union office is a couple of significant issues this week. First of all, clearly there is a push from government, both nationally and at a Queensland level, to try and increase the percentage of people returning to office, purely for the basis of trying to increase the economic activity in the CBD. So whether that happens in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, or doesn't happen until after the full vaccination program, we are going to be in a situation where there's going to be ongoing conversation around what that looks like in terms of the appropriate policies for government. What we've tried to do in this space is to work through improving the consultative mechanisms with government. We sought that during the state election, and we've got that commitment now that there are regular meetings with every Director General to talk about these issues. And also we've convened a central consultative forum that was a broader election commitment. But what we're seeking to do with that is to provide some clarity, because irrespective of whether the rule was 60% or 80%, there is a complete lack of clarity within what the rules are, who sets the rules and how they should be applied between the CHO, between the Public Service Commission and the Public Service Board and Directors General. So in terms of that, we will be seeking to engage back with government irrespective of when the lockdown hopefully finishes this week, but if it extends or gets repeated, we'll still be seeking to engage with the Public Service Commission and the Public Service Board to try and get clarity about what the 60% rule looks like, make sure that we don't move from 60 to 80% with undue haste in terms of where we're actually at with the health advice. And also seeking after this lockdown to re-engage with departments to look at what is the definition of essential work. Most departments have had a reasonable prospects and decisions in relation to returning people in the CBD and the broader Brisbane area in terms of what is essential work and what isn't essential work. But we still do have a couple of outstanding agencies such as Transport and Main Roads, which appear to take quite a different view and requiring people to work when opening customer service centres when it's illegal for anybody to visit those customer service centres. So there is a piece of work around what is the definition of essential work, and given, while we hadn't been prioritising that in the union office because we felt that the lockdowns were a thing of the past, given the experience this week, we'll reprioritise that engagement to make sure that we have better definitions and clearer definitions moving forward for what is essential work for short lockdowns and also, in the worst case scenario, longer lockdowns. We're also engaging with the departments in relation to the vaccination program, particularly for the priority groups. So we've had some engagement around the problems within disability services about people not being able to get access in relation to the vaccinations within work time. And the union has a developed policy that we've circulated and approved by our branch conference and our executive in relation to the rights of people to make sure that we maximise vaccinations, but also making it clear that that is still an individual choice. And then after we've done those two pieces of work, also then thinking through what is the future of work and how do we combat the kind of 80-20 sort of argument about boosting sales of coffee in the CBD compared to making sure that the gains that we've made around flexible work aren't lost as we return to office, and making sure that there can be a sensible conversation about what that looks like into the future, so we can actually have meaningful rights for flexible work practices in terms of maximising where people do want to work from home, that we don't go backwards in terms of that process that we've had over the last kind of 12 months in terms of this process, but also then working out what does this look like in terms of the interactions with the savings and debt plan that was looking at a smaller rental footprint in the CBD and looking at the suburban hub issue, and certainly looking at that, whether that's a 60-20-20 rule, if they do go to 80-20, that there would still be the ability to have work from home as a significant component in relation to flexible work practices, working out what that looks like in terms of vital entitlements. Clearly, some people can't work from home, some people can, depending on the nature of the work. Youth attention workers clearly can't work from home. Policy officers in 1 William Street clearly can work from home in some circumstances. What we need to develop is an appropriate decision framework matrix that employers are able to balance the rights of workers in terms of flexible work practices, but provide fair and reasonable decisions that are appealable in relation to how they apply broader principles that say that where people can work from home, they should be allowed to work from home, and what that mix looks like. And then secondly, having the potential for suburban hubs or other arrangements that are working from office rather than working from home, but still potentially meaning that people can avoid significant time in congestion or on public transport, and so therefore getting improved work-life balance, even if it is a higher level of work from office. The work from office could be a lot closer to people's homes. So those pieces of work are continuing. Clearly, this week has changed the dynamic of those conversations, and we'll see, hopefully, with low COVID numbers in the next couple of days, we'll be looking at return to office arrangements going a bit back to normal next week, but clearly the circumstances over the last 2 days reinforce the issue that there continues to be high risks until we get a significant percentage of the population vaccinated, and certainly the numbers in terms of the failure of the federal government to roll out that federal vaccine means that we are probably looking at much later than October. I think the numbers were like only a sixth of the numbers that were projected by the end of March actually got rolled out in terms of vaccination. So the longer the vaccination program takes, the longer the risks are for these sort of lockdowns. So that's where we're at. We will be continuing to talk at each departmental level about what your policies are and making sure that workers have the rights in this space, getting a better sense about what lockdown looks like, and then also centrally negotiating around the issue of rights for individuals in terms of flexible work practices, but also in relation to if there is a move from the 60-40 rule to the 80-20 rule, what that looks like in a practical sense. So in terms of that process, that is really also being driven by the revised mechanisms for consultation in the public sector that we were able to achieve as part of the commitments in relation to the state election, both in terms of getting guarantees around the fact that Directors General need to meet with us on a regular basis. We meet with delegates and union staff on a quarterly basis to give us access to the key decision makers and provide clarity, but also then centralised structure to make sure that we're able to provide greater clarity across the sector, certainly in terms of both the work from home, return to office environment, but also some of the key decisions in relation to the savings and debt plan and the recruitment selection limitations that have been put in place for a period of time. We had, particularly coming out of over the last couple of years, budget principle number 6 and the FTE cap, and what that meant, and then what that meant in terms of frontline versus non-frontline, and then that morphing through the savings and debt program over the last 12 months from that 6-month period from about this time last year to about October last year. There was no clarity at all in relation to how those things operated. And certainly we've met with a number of departments who can tell us something completely different to what the central agencies tell us, and there's no complete certainty for agencies working at a local level what that looks like. So we're trying to drive clarity around that to make sure that there is certainty around the recruitment process, the filling of vacancy process, and also the frontline, non-frontline complete furphy in relation to where that all fits. And part of that also really looks at, in terms of trying to emphasise the kind of initial processes around that, has been in relation to trying to address budget principle number 6, which has been the driver of the FTE cap for the last couple of years prior to the savings and debt introduction, but trying to have that reviewed in the lead up to the state election, into the state budget. We did get some movement around that through the cold rate review 2 years ago, and so it's an open issue at the moment. There has been some suspension of budget principle 6 in light of the budget in November, December last year. And there's also been a conversation around contractors and consultants, which is occurring in relation to the issues around savings and debt and trying to reduce the expenditure on labour hiring contractors and consultants where they could be directly employed. So we're trying to use the consultative mechanisms at the departmental level, and then at the central agency level, and then at the subcommittee of cabinet level to drive the conversation around forcing agencies to be honest about the number of contractors that they've employed as a way of avoiding the frontline FTE cap, and trying to drive a conversation that they need to rip that band-aid off and admit the number of public sector workers that they are employing, whether they're employing indirectly or directly, and employing them directly, employing them on their award and EB conditions, and giving them the same rights and entitlements, but then making sure that that process actually delivers a conversation in the state budget, because the time we've got to address this is in those budget papers, not so much in terms of the numbers employed in terms of FTEs, but in terms of I think it's budget paper number 2 or number 3 from Queensland Treasury that deals with the total numbers, the FTE numbers, and the cold rate outcome. That is the key objective for us between now and early June, in terms of using the consultative mechanisms to drive the budget principle conversation, as well as using the consultative mechanisms to drive, hopefully, improvements around guaranteeing long-term rights about flexible work for workers in that regard. In terms of then the other industrial work that we're doing that is having significant impacts has been the review of the Public Service Act. We had a number of changes last year to the Public Service Act around temporary employment and higher duties. In terms of that, we have some initial figures in what that is looking like in terms of numbers, and we saw a big jump in the number of reviews being completed. This isn't the number of people being converted. This is the number of reviews completed, because we've only got some data at this stage from the review of the Act. But we did see a big jump in the second quarter of last year, about doubling of the number, or close to doubling of the number of temporary employment reviews, a small number of casual reviews. We don't have a lot of members who are casual, but also about 2,000 higher duties reviews in terms of long-term higher duties. In terms of that, these numbers aren't, because the way the data is provided to us, we can't do a split, exact split in relation to the number of people being converted, but we saw around 3,000 people being converted in the second half, in quarter 2, so about 4,000 temporaries and about 2,000 to 3,000 higher duties. And what that really means in terms of a process is we've had a very significant change in terms of guaranteeing employment security through this review process, as well as guaranteeing income security for people who are in long-term higher duties. The long-term higher duties is a double-edged sword. There were clearly a number of people who have been tapped on the shoulder who are getting access to this process, but also a number of long-term employees who are genuinely being held in a process of flux around 30% of their salary because of organisational change, or an SES person being on secondment to another project, meaning that these people were having to live week to week on salaries of unknown process. So in terms of that, we have had very major change. The appeals that we've run from this haven't been as successful, though, even though we're getting very significant numbers converted. We're then reviewing those numbers at a departmental level on a case-by-case basis, and we're then also pursuing individual cases through the Industrial Relations Commission to try and improve the law on in this area. We've got some very good decisions around temporary employment, good decisions at departmental level about higher duties, less good decisions through the Industrial Relations Commissions about higher duties. So we are having to take the lived experience of these Act changes and try and drive them into reforming the law, so we can make sure that as an ongoing basis that those laws can be improved. In terms of Education Queensland, they have given us a bit more detail in relation to this, although most people online won't be from EQ. We have had in Education Queensland about 1,000 people, so about half people who applied, over half people who applied for high duties did get converted. About a third of the people who are temporary did get converted. Still a significant problem with the way that the Industrial Relations Commission has reviewed the directive rather than the Act, has meant that it's giving some encouragement to agencies not to actually give people a decision. They're calling them deemed decisions. So if they fail in the Act to fit the deadlines, they are getting some benefit from that in terms of the appealability. So we are trying to make sure that in terms of that process, we can tighten that up in terms of the continuing process. The Act itself, we have minor amendments to the Act, which are significant but small in space. To the Act last year, we have as an election commitment that they will finalise the complete rewrite of the Public Service Act this year. That's got three major components to it at the moment. First of those is a significant review of how investigations are undertaken, both disciplinary and also bullying and a range of other investigations. We've had real problems with agencies in terms of this regard, in terms of the length of investigations are taking up to 2 years, where bullying is alleged. Often the decisions are the investigations are outsourced to external consultants, and the people who made the complaints aren't told about the review. 2 years later, we find the review's been completed, we don't know the outcome. So there is major work to be done in terms of reforming how investigations are done, which can be done outside of the legislation. Secondly, there is a large piece of work that's got to be done this year as a result of the election commitments we got, which was our review of recruitment and selection processes within the sector. Some of these are about the legislation, but some of these are clearly in large number of agencies. There is no confidence in the merit principle actually being applied. There is significant concerns in relation to nepotism and inappropriate selection processes. We've seen a number of reports by the Criminal Justice Commission's CCC in relation to corruption around selection processes. So this is a large piece of work, and the State Conference of the Union earlier this month has moved towards a process of starting just after Easter to engage with members around not only do we have confidence in the system, but what is our alternative? Because while there is significant concerns about the system, we haven't got a clear view from members as to what you want to see as an alternative method. And the other piece of major work that's being undertaken in relation to the review of the Act is a number of subcommittees being formed. Some of those going to the nature of the Act, around the scope of the Act, some of it about the nature of the governance of the public service, around the Public Service Board versus a governance council, which was suggested by Peter Bridgman in his review. Two major reviews in relation to employment conditions, one being about the nature of employment, so the nature of permanency and how people are employed and how they're being converted, but trying to make people employed permanently to start with rather than temporarily and then converted. Another piece of work around that in relation to fair treatment at work in terms of things like independent medical assessments, discipline processes, workplace bullying, harassment, grievances, and those issues are a large part of that work. And then there's another piece of work specifically to deal with senior officers and the problem that we have that because we've been able to get the enterprise bargaining agreement moving again, and we've got some good outcomes in that in relation to the wage outcomes that we've talked about at the last monthly briefing. So public servants will get a 5% increase this year. They'll get 2.5% on the 1st of September this year, and then a further 2.5% on the 1st of March next year. That means AO8s are now overtaking SOs. And so that's already happened in some places, particularly health. And so there needs to be a conversation around what is the nature of employment conditions for SOs within the system. The other major issue is I know I'm speaking quite quickly, and we'll try and get further outcome for people out of the chat. Is in relation to superannuation. The superannuation, Qsuper, SunSuper have signed a deed of arrangement. That will mean that it's almost certain that we'll now move towards a combined super fund come the 1st of September, or in September. That will, as we did a briefing for members about that a couple of weeks ago, this will have no impact on the defined benefit scheme. The defined benefit scheme, the guarantee that workers have in relation to the defined benefit scheme, is irrespective of the structure of the superannuation fund. And the state government, through legislation, is required to pay you your defined benefit. That's only for a small percentage of our members because the scheme has been closed for a number of years, but we are continuing to prosecute and ensure any legislative change in relation to the amalgamation of the funds does not impact on the defined benefit and the guarantee that workers have in relation to that. For the majority of our members are now in the accumulation scheme, which is where you put in money, the government put in money, they invest it on your behalf, and you get the returns of that investment. And that investment is minus costs in relation to the scheme. So clearly we have had significant concerns in relation to the insurance components of Qsuper and what that has meant in terms of the particularly around increasing costs, but also because of those increasing costs, reducing benefits and around income protection in particular. So those insurance products won't automatically change as a result of the amalgamation, but we are still continuing to engage with Qsuper, and we will with the board. We had the chair of the board and the together nominee on the Qsuper board address our state conference 2 weeks ago, whenever 2 weeks ago, to talk about the fact that we need to engage around insurance. It's how it matches also with work cover, with sick leave, with a significant impact in relation to mental health within the public sector, which was true before COVID, but our expectation is post-COVID, the implications for mental health particularly are going to be significant, and making sure that the employer carries those costs rather than using superannuation insurance as a way of the employees covering the costs of those increased hazards at work. But also making sure that with a larger scheme, hopefully making sure that the costs of running the insurance scheme are lower per person. So therefore, particularly for accumulation members, there are less overheads in relation to your superannuation. So in terms of that process, we're working that through carefully. Guarantees in relation to the defined benefit will be there. We'll continue to prosecute that. Insurance will be a key issue for us, whether or not the amalgamation goes ahead in relation to Qsuper and SunSuper, and making sure that they continue processes. But we had a lot of questions from members in the lead up to today's conference, Zoom, around what we look in terms of sexual harassment, the Respect at Work report that's been subject to significant debate nationally around this. The Queensland Union Movement is prosecuting this with the state government in particular. The Queensland Council of Unions last week made this the priority for the union movement this year. With our engagement with government, we've called for a specific Queensland Advisory Committee where we can engage with the state government to talk about what Respect at Work looks like, how we deal with sexual harassment in the workplace, and we'll be doing a separate Zoom on this in the next couple of weeks to go through some more detail, because clearly in terms of one of the feedbacks we got from these half-hour sessions was trying to keep them to about half an hour, but then where there are major topics of significant issue, have those as separate Zooms so people can go through and get a fuller briefing on that. But this is an important issue. We are going to have material trying to promote the issue, the zero tolerance in the workplace, looking at sexual harassment in the workplace health and safety context, but also what we can do to try and change the culture around it, but also then looking at how do we also change the government policies in relation to sexual harassment referral officers and a range of issues that have been lost, particularly since the legislation was amalgamated into the Public Service Act, and looking at that. So we'll be trying to get that out as quickly as possible to people, so you can, probably we'll be doing it after the school holidays and hopefully after when people are back at work rather than stuck at home. The other issue that we've been asked for a separate briefing on is the work we've been doing in relation to the Australian Conservation Council and the broader coalition in relation to the Climate, the Better Futures Australia campaign, which is trying to work with other community groups and the environment groups to make the issue of a just transition for workers, but also for the community, and looking at some of the international engagements that we're going to have this year in relation to the long-term future. Climate has been a significant issue for our union for a number of years. We're hoping that by working with these other groups, we'll be able to try and put that back on the agenda. Then in terms of the other bit we wanted to talk briefly about was the broader campaign that the union has been running in relation to trying to address the cause of the frontline, non-frontline debacle in terms of the cap and how it's been treated, is really to talk about the issue of the Courier Mail kind of stereotype of public servants. And so people may have seen, both in terms, particularly in regional Queensland, some of our TV and radio ads.
I'm Hannah and I work at the Child Development Service. We look after babies and children. We are essential workers. Without us, no one would get the healthcare that they needed.
Public servants, here when you need us.
Alex Scott, Together Queensland.
It's our job to take the initial concerns for children and determine where to from there. My name is Alexandra and I'm a child safety officer. When I wake up in the morning, I know that I need to be there for that young person. I'm a public servant and our job is to help families. It's heart-wrenching at times, but also very rewarding to see those families come out the other side of their crisis, knowing that you're making a difference to a young life. Public servants, here when you need us.
Authorised by Alex Scott, Together Union.
So in terms of that kind of campaign that you may have seen last year, particularly on some of our regional TV guide, but also in terms of our social media profiling of this, we are wanting to try and take this campaign into workplaces this year as we move out of the COVID environment. So you'll be, if people do want to have, there's a range of these posters. We'll be doing a range of new ads this year, particularly targeting some different groups to try and change the definition and public perception around public servants. That'll be on social media, on some TV and particularly catch-up TV, but we'll be looking for members if they're interested to either to put up posters to try and reinforce this message and talk about it in their workplaces. We've also got some posters that we're developing up in relation to the Respect at Work campaign and the zero tolerance towards sex harassment. So as one of the outcomes out of today's Zoom, we'll be also asking for members to consider whether they'd be willing to have some of this union material in their workplaces and also to share it as we move forward. So that's really trying to hit it on at the half hour. I haven't been able to read all of the questions, but if anybody got questions in chat, if they can do that, we'll do an email out to everybody who participated today, asking if they're interested in having any of this material, and also if you have suggestions about how to make these activities more functional for you in the future. And we'll try, if not, we'll project to have the next one of these Zooms for public servants on the last Wednesday of April, which will be just before Labor Day. At this stage, we are planning Labor Day to continue, but particularly that will depend a bit on what happens over the next couple of weeks. But really what we'll be looking at is trying to provide you with accurate information about what's happening with those consultative mechanisms, but really needing your support in relation to promoting the public service campaign, but also getting involved in relation to the labour hire, dealing with the budget principle number 6, because we're going to deal with that in April, May, before the June budget. We don't trust government departments to tell us the truth, and so therefore we need to make sure that we have accurate information about the actual number of contractors, labour hire and consultants in agencies, so we can drive it up that kind of pyramid of consultation and go from there. So thanks everybody for dialing in today. In terms of this process, we'll send out a notice for the next one early, but also then to add some reminders. But we're still learning how to do these Zooms in terms of this process. Just as you had to change your workplace in relation to COVID, if you have suggestions about how to make these better, as well as having suggestions about specific ones, such as the Respect at Work one, please, there is no, every idea you have is an important one, so please let your organiser know, or by email, let us know about how you'd like us to present these better in the future. But everybody, thanks for your time very much, and we'll try and make sure that every question that's come through in terms of the process we can take through from there. Thank you for your time.